Hey there. Welcome to this week's episode of Next Level Play Therapy. I'm super excited this week to have Liana Lowenstein back as a guest. We're going to be talking about her brand new book that she is just launching. It's the second edition, updated and revised of Getting Creative Interventions for Bereaved Children. I have the first edition. It's really good. Also, she has another book that's been out for a little while on the same topic, which also was a really good book. It's called Cory Helps Children Cope with Grief. So we'll talk a little bit about those more at the end. So Liana has been working with children and adolescents using play therapy for decades. She's an author of numerous amazing books, which I have talked about in the past. Actually, that's how Liana and I met, because I was fangirling out in my Facebook group about the fact that I reference her book in my book because it's got so many really good resources. She's a favorite speaker internationally, locally here in the U.S., so I'm really excited to have Liana on today, and we're going to be talking about grief, which I think is a really important topic. I think if you've been in the play therapy field for any length of time, then you've worked with children who've experienced grief, and grief oftentimes looks different in children. So a lot of the adult models that we probably learned may or may not be so helpful for depending on your clients in your work and how to use play therapy to help children heal. So that is what we're going to talk about, because play therapy has become the go-to approach, I think, which I think is amazing. So I want to welcome Liana and let you tell a little bit more about yourself, and then we'll get started on the topic. Oh, also before we do that, I want to welcome any of you watching live to go ahead and post your name in the comments. We would love to know who's here. If you have questions for Liana or comments, please go ahead and post those in the comments. The only thing that we ask is that you not post specific questions about specific clients. So post where you're from, what population you work with, where you're working, what questions you have for Liana and the topic. And so let's get started. So welcome, Liana.
Thank you so much. And Kathy, I'm a huge fan of you and your work, your publications, and especially, this live stream that you offer. You are making such an important contribution to the field of play therapy. I don't know, people have to really appreciate the time that you put.
It does take a lot of time.
It does take a lot of time.
Yeah.
So props to you. Thank you for all you do for our field.
And I'm thinking you probably feel the same way about this, but you and I have both been in the field several decades, right? And at some point you really want to pass on your knowledge to the next generation and kind of support the next generation of play therapists who are, coming, because they're the future, right? We want to pass on and support them.
Yeah. Well, I love to support the newbies, but I also love to provide, helpful information to those who have been in the field for a really long time and are looking to, we're always learning. Whether, I've been doing this since 1988, that's a long time, but I'm always learning. And so we're not just talking about, supporting the newbies, but also those who have been in the field for a long time, because the learning never ends.
Yeah, that's a really good point too, because even now I still I'll open up your books and look for, especially when I'm doing family play therapy. I did it this week, looking for activities. What can I do? What are we working on? What do I need to focus on? Get some ideas, because otherwise we kind of get stuck in our ruts.
Yes.
We use the same thing over and our go-tos, but it's nice to have other resources
Yes.
to be able to support clients as well. So that's a really good point.
Yeah.
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 So today's topic is how to help bereaved children in play therapy. And this is an area that you're really knowledgeable about. You've done a lot of work, written a lot of books about this. So I'm wondering for you, what would you say are key guidelines, things for play therapists to really think about when they're working with children who are experiencing grief?
Mm-hmm. So I guess I want to start off by saying that we live in a death phobic society, and it's really hard for people to talk about death. Even saying the word death and dying, right? We've got all these other words, past,
I know.
on, because it's really hard to talk about. And so I guess my first important guideline is that we need to be able to openly and comfortably talk about death, use the D words, to first of all model it, but also then to facilitate, to help our clients, whether it's a child that we're working with, a teen, a family, to help others be able to then talk comfortably about death, to take the scary out of it. So that would be my first guideline. And then, of course, I live in Toronto, and Toronto is the most culturally diverse city on the planet. We were written up in National Geographic many years ago because of our diversity. And so I am working with families from many different cultural, religious, spiritual backgrounds. And especially when we're talking about working with bereavement, families are coming to me with their own cultural, spiritual differences. And we need to be able to learn from them, and be attuned to where they're coming from in terms of those beliefs, and be respectful of it. And also then when I'm using, specific activities, whether it's a story or a game, I'm asking the caregivers in that first parent session about their beliefs so that I could then integrate that into the activities, whether it's a story or a game.
That's actually a really good point, especially when you're working with diverse, culturally diverse families. Really asking, because there are cultural aspects, and then there are the nuances based on each individual client, right? So I think asking them is a really respectful way to make sure it's really individualized to them, but also that we've started the conversation.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So let's say I'm planning to use a game in the next session with a child. I might email a copy of the game to the parent first and say, let's co-create this. What about these questions are appropriate? Is there anything that's not appropriate? How might I word this? What should I add to this? And this is where it's empowering for caregivers. They know their child best, and then they could integrate those cultural, spiritual beliefs into those activities to make them fit appropriately for the child, for the family.
Yeah, I think also grief and loss, death, even here in the US, as well as worldwide, right, will bring up what are your beliefs about spirituality?
Right.
What are your beliefs about what happens after death? What are your rituals around death? What are your beliefs around that and what happens? Because I've had children who want to talk about their faith.
Yes.
And they integrate it into the playroom, and that's going to come up around death.
Yes. Yeah. And then another really important guideline is, and we all know this, but the importance of creating that safe space for the child to grieve, which includes, normalizing and validating whatever they're feeling, conveying the message that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. But also because when a child is grieving, especially if it's the death of somebody in their family, then the caregiver is also grieving, and the caregiver, because of their own grief, may be struggling to support their child because maybe they're overwhelmed by their own grief. And so it makes our job even that much more important, the way we can support the child, because maybe the child, isn't able to grieve openly at home. Maybe they're worried that, oh, if I cry, I'll make my parent more upset. And so they're masking it all. They're holding it inside. So we really want to create that environment where kids can just come and talk and express and get that support and that validation. And then when we can, we want to involve the caregivers, the whole family, in the process to help them grieve together. We all know the important role that the caregiver plays in the child's adjustment to whatever the child is coming to see us for. And especially when it's a death, the very important role that the caregivers play, and with teachers as well. I always get permission from the child's caregivers to reach out to the child's teacher. And I have, in my books, my 2 bereavement books, a handout that you can photocopy and give to the child's teacher. But you don't have to have my books to do this. There's tons of great resources online. The Dougie Center is one of my favorites, where, you can go there and find all kinds of resources. So reach out to the child's teacher, provide them with some ways that they can support the grieving child in the classroom. And then another really important tip is, each child is going to grieve differently. You can have 4 children all in the same family dealing with the death of their mom, for example, and each of those 4 kids may be grieving very differently. And so it really speaks to the importance of doing a good, thorough, comprehensive assessment on the child and the family as a whole to determine what are the child's specific needs. Some children may be doing, quite well, and maybe the intervention is providing some psychoeducation to the caregiver. Maybe the child's needs would best be served by referring them to a children's peer support group on grief. Or maybe the child's needs are more complex. Maybe the child is suffering from traumatic grief. That's a whole other topic that we don't have time to go into, but it's important for you to understand what are the differences between grief and traumatic grief. And in traumatic grief, that requires a different way of supporting the child. So doing a comprehensive assessment. So that's an overview of some important guidelines.
Yeah, and I think those are really important things to think about too. I think you raised a lot of really good points about, especially I was thinking as you were talking, children are grieving, but if it's like the death of a family member or a loved one in the family, sometimes even a beloved pet who is like a family member that's been in the family for a long time.
Yeah.
Children sometimes hesitate to show their grief because they are afraid it's gonna make their parent cry. And if they see their parent cry, then they think that's, they're egocentric. The younger they are, the more egocentric they are. Look what I've done to my parent.
Yes.
But sometimes they also don't understand parents grieving. So I think that point you raised about creating that safe space for the child to be able to grieve, and then how are we gonna get the family together?
Yes.
And talk about death and help support parents so that they can then be the support for their child.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I do in both these 2 recent bereavement books, Cory Helps Kids Cope with Grief and Creative Interventions for Bereaved Children, is that there are parent handouts. So for every treatment issue I'm working on with the child, there is a handout. And again, you can photocopy stuff from my books. You can photocopy these handouts to give parents really specific tips on how they can support their child. And that was a really important component that I wanted to include because, again, we know that the child will do better if their parent, if their caregiver is able to support them appropriately.
Yeah. I always talk about how can we help parents be that therapeutic agent of change for their child, because they're going to be around in the child's life way longer, hopefully, right? That's the goal, way longer than us.
Yes.
And that can be hard when parents are grieving
Yes.
a loss, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you were going to talk, so you were going to share some strategies that we can use, which are always really helpful. So do you want to share some of your strategies?
When I was preparing for today, I mean, there's so many different activities that I could share. I first want to just say, though, that people often make an assumption, because my books are, contain directive, structured play therapy activities, that, I'm very directive in my work, but I'm really integrative, and I blend structured directive with child-led play, non-direct, child-centered play therapy. And I love the blending of those two things. So, for today, I'm going to be sharing some directive techniques, but I want to just emphasize that, I also think it's really important to just, also incorporate some of those more, give children the opportunity to play out whatever they need to play out. But okay, so a couple of strategies I want to share. So first, I always like to start with equipping the child with some coping strategies. And again, when we're talking about bereaved children, grieving children, they may not have a whole lot of emotional support in their life. And so I think it becomes even more important to help the child learn practice and ways to cope with often their very overwhelming feelings of grief. And so one of the things that I have that I've updated in this second edition is the Feel Better bag. So people who have the first edition will be familiar with the Feel Better bag. So it's a little kit that the child creates in the first session. They get to decorate their bag, and then each session they get they learn a new coping strategy, and it has a little prop that they take the Feel Better bag home in the first session, and then each session they get a prop to take home to add to their Feel Better bag that is their visual prompt of the coping strategy. And so there are things like, yoga with some yoga cards that they can print, that you print off and give to the child that they can decorate. There's, some deep breathing strategies. There's a letter that they write to their self. There's some self-talk things. So, and this is where you can really be creative, right? In the techniques that you teach the child, and make it very individualized for the child's age and what might they respond well to. So first things first, coping strategies.
Yep.
And then involving the parent or the caregiver, whoever is bringing the child to the sessions, teaching the strategy not just to the child, but to the parent as well, because often everyone in the family can benefit from learning and using these coping strategies. And you want the parent to then, of course, coach the child to use these strategies. And then the next area that I think is important to cover is psychoeducation. Again, children, who are grieving, okay, so something's happened in their family or in their life. And often they don't, especially with young kids, they don't really, they feel overwhelmed, but they don't really kind of fully understand what's happened. So when we can make it into a game, it again takes the scary out of learning and talking about this hard stuff. So I have the learning about death card game, and I'm just gonna.
Well, that's a great way to do it, psychoeducation, and make it not so dry and boring.
Exactly. So making it into a game. So I have a few versions of this. I'm just going to share. So, I'll just read the instructions. So it can be hard to talk about death and upset feelings. So let's play a game to make it easier. To play, pick the top card from the stack of cards. You just need a deck of cards. If you get a red card, I'll read a question for you to answer. The questions are about death, learning about death. You can answer, say pass, or ask for help. If you get a black card, we'll both follow the instructions from one of the items on the actions list. So we're getting up and moving because kids have a hard time sitting.
Yeah.
If you get a queen or king, we'll both follow the instructions from the relaxation list. So again, with this game, I'm integrating coping strategies in the game. So there's questions, there's action cards, there's relaxation cards. So examples of questions. What does dead mean? Can a dead person come back alive? And then there's questions about like, what is a casket? Viewing visitation, which again, this is where I'm integrating.
Great question.
If so you want to know, like, was the person buried? Was it a burial? Was it a cremation? And then how are you going to explain these concepts to the child? Where do dead people go? Again, this is where you want to integrate the family's beliefs about this. Is it normal to have a lot of mixed up feelings when someone dies? What are some worries children may have after someone dies? What does guilty mean? And is it normal to feel guilty when someone dies? So those are just some examples. And then we have versions for suicide, homicide, drug overdose, line of duty death, serious illness, natural disaster. Some really specific questions for those issues. So let me just go to the one for overdose.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, there's been such a huge, increase in overdose deaths, and there's not a lot out there to support children who are coping with a suicide, a drug overdose death.
Yeah.
So again, helping kids to just learn, like, what are drugs? Why are drugs sometimes dangerous? Why do people misuse legal drugs or illegal drugs? What is drug addiction or a substance use disorder? How might children feel when someone in their family has a substance use disorder? What is a substance-related death? So again, taking the scary out of it, helping families talk openly about these really, really, really hard things. So that's one activity. And again, you would adapt. You would adapt it for the child's age and specific needs, and get the caregiver on board in terms of collaborating with you on modifying the questions.
Yeah. Those are some really good questions.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know.
A bit of an echo.
Yeah.
And then, living in Toronto, we have a lot of wonderful resources to support bereaved children and families, but many communities don't have, like, we have, group programs, all kinds of different group programs, but you may be living in a community that doesn't offer those kinds of, services. And we know that, a child being in a support group can be so helpful, right? Just getting support from others who are in similar circumstances. And so one of the things that I think is important is, so I've included some letters from, like, JP, I call them JP's letter. So letters that you can read to the child. Again, I have different versions of the letter, one for kids, suicide, homicide, drug overdose, so that if a child doesn't have the opportunity to be in a support group, you can read the letter, JP's letter, to them, and that helps the child feel like they're not alone. So I'll just read part of the JP's letter, the version for suicide. So it says, "Hi, if you're reading this, then it means that someone in your life died by suicide. Notice, Kathy, that I'm being really open and direct about the use of the word suicide. I know something about what you're going through because that happened to me too. I wrote this letter so you would understand that you're not alone, that there are other kids who know how you feel. My story may be different in some ways from yours, but there are probably some similarities too. After the suicide, I didn't want to talk about it with anyone. In fact, I pretended that everything was fine. But then I went to a group where I met other grieving kids. It was difficult to tell others about the suicide because I worried about what they would think. But I felt relieved once I talked about it. I had a lot of worries after the death. I felt worried that more bad things would happen, and I had scary thoughts about the death. I also felt very confused and angry. I didn't understand why someone would end their own life, and I felt angry at them for taking their own life and leaving me. I didn't handle my feelings well. I yelled and hit and got into trouble a lot. Then I would feel like I was bad and that everyone hated me. I learned a deep breathing strategy in the group. I didn't want to do the deep breathing strategy at first, but once I started using it, I liked the feeling of being calm much better than the feeling of being worried and angry. Anyways, the letter goes on. And so it's a way to really validate and normalize a lot of the feelings and reactions that children are experiencing. And then it gives some coping strategies. So those are, I guess, two examples. I could go on if we have more time. I don't know. I'll let you tell me if I should share a couple more activities or if there's questions. What do you think? What would be the best use of our time right now?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of more. I mean, yeah, we have a time for a couple more.
Okay.
I love that idea of using the game to help with the psychoeducation, and because I think you're right. I think adults, we're afraid of death,
Yeah.
right? And we don't know what to say.
Yeah.
So when you call out the elephant in the room, you give permission to talk about things. And I think those are really nice ways to be able to do that. One, engaging parents. Do you ever have sessions where you have the family in there doing some of these activities together?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So again, I let my assessment drive not just the treatment plan, but the modality. And often I have some individual sessions with the child, some individual sessions with the parent or caregiver, some parent-child sessions, and some family sessions. But again, it depends. But I think it's so very important to support the whole family and really help them to grieve together. And a lot of the activities in this book can be, I have a whole section on family play therapy activities.
That's awesome.
But a lot of the activities that are, geared to individual kids can absolutely be used in a whole family session.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I also love that you just talked about the fact that you do the assessment first. I think sometimes it's been my experience that sometimes play therapists want to skip over the assessment because they want to get right to helping.
Yeah.
They feel like the assessment is going to make family members not want to engage. But my experience has been the opposite. When I get in there and do a good assessment, I ask a lot of questions, and because I'm interested and they can tell. It's like, I always say it's like going to the doctor, but the doctor doesn't ask enough questions and you leave there going, I'm like, they prescribe something that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
Well, also, I want to just emphasize that from the first moment I'm seeing the child, I'm intervening as well as assessing.
yeah.
So like the Feel Better bag, that's an intervention. And I am introducing that at the beginning of the first session. So the assessment activity or activities that I do in that first session may take, one part of the session, but I'm also intervening. And then when I'm involving the whole family in learning those coping strategies, or I'm providing in the parent intake meeting a tip sheet, that's intervention. You're assessing, but you're also intervening at the same time. So you can do both.
Yes.
Both at the same time. Also, let's say the assessment activity is asking the child, let's say through a game. I use a lot of games. Questions about, if the child wasn't there when the person died, so who told you the person died? What do you remember them saying? How did you
Those are good
react
questions.
when you learned the person died? How did other people in your family react? What's something that has helped you since the person died? What's something that's been really difficult for you since the person died? So questions like that, again, through a game, that's an assessment activity, but it's also an intervention, because when you're asking these questions and you're giving the child an opportunity to talk about it, that's therapeutic for the child.
Yes.
And then as the child's responding, you're using all those good, important clinical skills of normalizing, validating, reflecting. That's therapeutic for the child. So assessment and intervention go hand in hand.
Yes. So I have to do a little disclosure here. So my husband has gone off to work, and our dogs are now in the office with me. So you may see, like, in the background on the video, you
Love
may
it.
see like a little black tail.
Okay, no problem.
And you may hear this moaning as my dog is like rolling.
Okay, well, thank you for telling us that, so we're not caught off guard.
I know, or wondering what is she doing in the background there. Yeah, so they're both here. So if you hear little jingles, or you hear moaning, or
Okay.
digging,
Okay, we're good.
They like to be with their people.
Yes.
So yeah. Yeah, if you want to, I don't know if you want to have if you have another activity you want to share, and then we'll kind of wrap up with that one.
Let me share one more that I think is really important. So when we're working with bereaved children, I think it's common for us to do memorializing stuff, like let's make a keepsake box. Let's look at photos of the person who died and make a photo album. Let's talk about your memories. And often that part of the work doesn't include helping the child to talk about ambivalent feelings towards the person who died.
That's awesome.
If the assessment, the child, the caregiver or the child brings up that there are ambivalent feelings towards the person who died, it's really important to include that in the treatment process. Now, of course, you have to explain and get parents on board, right? Because, the family may feel we don't talk ill about the person who died. So helping the caregiver to be able to talk about their own ambivalent feelings and giving permission for the child, so very important. And then how do we do this in a way that is play-based or engaging for the child? So I have the child create a paper cutout.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then there are questions that the child then answers by writing on one or the other side. So first they write about what they didn't like. Well, first I want to bring up that nobody's perfect. And in all our relationships, there are things, we like and don't like about the person. And then I might share an example, like, I love my daughter. I love my daughter so much, but sometimes she does things that drive me crazy. Like if I say, if I ask her to clean her room and she doesn't, and then I'm frustrated because she's not listening, I'm angry. So it's okay to be angry at the person and still love them at the same time. So you want to get, first of all, just kind of explain ambivalence, give some examples that the child will kind of understand, and then do an activity to help them. So what I didn't like, so this is one that was done by a child whose parent died from substance misuse. So I didn't like when he got drunk, when he hit my mom, when he did drunk driving, when he yelled and got mad. And then what I liked, when he took me fun places, when he got me nice things, when he taught me to rap, when he was nice to me and to my mommy. And then they can decorate the paper.
Oh, that is awesome. I love that one.
Yeah. So now again, this is something that you can do in an individual session with a child or as a family session, and everyone has their own, and then they can talk about it as a family, which is even more validating and really helping the whole family to grieve. But you've got to get the parent on board first. You don't just do this with the child without getting the parent on board to that. But that's a missing piece often in grief support plans that is so very important to many children.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think the other side too is one, being able to talk about it. And also sometimes in situations like that, having conversations about what family members might be saying about that parent in front of the child that
Mhm.
may not be so helpful. But you know what? Like you talked about assessment and also interventions, you're going to find out
Yes.
because you can tell by what they say.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to, I think I love that you're talking about the ambivalent feelings
Yes.
and kind of breaking the unspoken rule. We don't talk, well, sometimes it's spoken.
Mhm.
We don't talk bad about the dead,
Yes.
but then it stays buried if we don't talk about it in a healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the child
Yeah.
gets so confused and they don't know what to do with those feelings.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those are awesome activities. Thank you so much for sharing those. Um, do you want to talk about how people can get your book?
Yeah.
Um, and like, if people want to like check out your trainings and things like that, and then we'll post all of those in the comments as well for those of you who are watching live and those of you who are watching the replay. And also for those of you who are listening on the podcast episode, we'll post those in the comments and the description and also Lee and I will talk a little bit about how to access some of these really amazing resources.
Yeah. So all my books are available on Amazon and other online platforms. But you can also get my books on my website. If you are watching this before September 30th, 2024, um, I'm currently having a big book sale where you get 25% off all my
Ooh,
books.
nice.
And if you buy any 4 books, you get 35% off. So you get an extra 10% off. So that sale is on until end of September 2024. And then after that, I'll give you a discount code with code PC14. That's P as in Peter, C as in cat, PC14. That'll give you 20% off all my books and then another 10% off if you buy any 4 books. And that sale is always on my website. Um, I've really tried to make my website a hub of free resources. So on my website, you can download a free ebook with lots of activities from people have contributed from all over the world for this ebook, and you can check that out. You can also sign up for my newsletter that goes out a few times a year, and everyone who signs up for my newsletter automatically gets entered into a draw to win a free book. I have lots and lots of articles on my website, an article library for parents and an article library for mental health professionals. So check that out. And there are links to my trainings. So in fact, next week, next Tuesday, September 23rd, I'm doing a one-day webinar on working with bereaved children, teens, and families.
Oh, I bet that's going to be a good one.
So it'll be recorded. So if you're not able to watch it live, you can purchase the recording. And it's I love these full day trainings because it really allows me to take a deep dive into working, into working in this area in a much more comprehensive way. And then I'm also teaching the same topic for a group in Australia. So for those of you who live in that time zone, you can watch it live, or you can also attend from the US, and it's going to be sort of after hours, like I think it's 6 o'clock Eastern time, Toronto Eastern time. So anyways, there's links for all of that on my website, as well as links to all my other trainings. I have trainings on, coming up on school refusal, divorce. I'm teaching a 4-day certificate program on innovations for working with children and families. That's going to be a great training.
Ooh, that sounds good.
Trauma-focused CBT. So lots of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. So, and do you want to give your website? We'll put it in the comments as well, but you want to tell people your website so they can pop over there and check all those out?
It's just my name, lianalowenstein.com. So LianaLowenstein, lianalowenstein.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today and kind of sharing your resources and knowledge about this topic. I think it really is an important topic. And I think a lot of the things that you raised about like the cultural aspects and making sure to check in with parents about different beliefs or things that one that you're going to be doing, but also get the feedback on that kind of helps prepare, making sure you're understanding the cultural beliefs and traditions about death and dying in the family, but also like, let's talk about it, like making it not scary and giving a safe space for children and families and parents to be able to process what's been going on and work through that grief process and understanding grief. There's no rules around grief. Like how you grieve is how you grieve. There's no timelines. There's not a, like a right or wrong way to do it. Your grief process is your grief process, and kind of giving permission and supporting that. So
Yes.
so welcome. So welcome. So thank you for being on for today.
Thank
And
you so much for having me.
yeah, it was great having you again. Alrighty. So for those of you, we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Everybody.